For some little while, the question was being asked, what's the difference between a charm, an amulet, and a talisman? And it was suggested that perhaps the talisman is like an icon, something that we wear that represents and connects us to our God self or our divine self, or whatever it is that we like to call it. But keeping that talisman and what it represents as our focal point, we need to dive deeper. But first of all, there's a reminder of that Mulla story. It's that story about the young man who heard that Mulla was somewhat of a great mystic and a magician. So he decided to follow him around to see what he did. And one day, as he was following Mulla around, he saw the Mulla sit under a tree and put out his hand. And as soon as he put out his hand, a bowl of sherbet arrived, which he partook of. And then he held out his other hand, and some delicious halwa, the sweetmeat, appeared in his hand. And the young man was so impressed. He wanted to know how Mulla had this prowess, this magic. So he went over and asked him, how can I learn to do what you do? And Mulla said, well, first you have to pass a test. Oh, said the young man, what's the test? And Mulla said, well, do you want the easy question or the hard question? And the young man, being a little bit, having a little inflated ego, said, well, give me the hard question. So Mulla said to him, tell me, how would you open a hole in your garden fence big enough for your chickens to go in and peck in your neighbor's yard, but not big enough for your neighbor's chickens to come and peck in your yard? Well, the young man scratched his head and had, of course, no answer to this question. So feeling somewhat humbled, he went off down the road, scratching his head in being very perplexed. Mulla just laughed to himself and said, he's on his way. He's on his way. And diving deeper, keeping as our focal point this talisman and what it represents to us. There's a story about two monks. They lived in the high mountains of Tibet, and one of them was called Geeho. And Geeho practiced and served the Lotus Sutra of the Buddha. And the other monk, called Geerko, served the Diamond Sutra of the Buddha. They lived just a few meters apart. And Geerko, every day his needs were met. Out of the ethers, out of the hands of the gods, was everything that he needed to live on. But Geeho was a poor man. He relied only on what others brought to him, the villagers who brought their fare for him to eat. He was a poor and humble man. But Geerko used to pride himself that his merits from chanting his Diamond Sutra had put him in a position where he was served, and of course his neighbor Geeho must be serving a lesser sutra, the Lotus Sutra, and did not merit such as he himself was receiving. But one day, no food arrived. 2 days, no food arrived. 3 days, no food arrived, and Geerko's stomach was rumbling, and he cried to the gods. In fact, he cried to Subhuti, the servant of the Buddha, who he considered to be the leading light, who he felt was serving him. He berated him. But that night, with his stomach grumbling, there appeared in his dreams an old Indian monk, one of those monks who wear the robes where their shoulder is bared. And that old monk scolded Geerko. How do you think that you merit the worth of being served by the gods, when what you purport to be service is merely self-serving? You do not and are not a representative of what the Diamond Sutra teaches. Well, somewhat chastened, Geerko in his dreams asked, well, where does all of my food and all those things that I need come from, if they do not come from the gods? And the old monk replied, they come from your neighbor, Geeho. He receives, uncalled for and unbidden, the largesse of the gods. And this he passes to you out of compassion for you. Now, not long after, one of the acolytes of Geeho happened to be passing Geerko's abode, but still he was boasting, and showing off to the young acolyte. And he said to the acolyte, this is what I can do. What does your master do? And the young acolyte said, my master asks for nothing. He has no power. He accepts whatever is given. Again, that night, the old Indian monk appeared to Geerko and scolded him roundly. Go to your neighbor, be humble, and ask his forgiveness for those thoughts that you have had. Be grateful. Geerko woke up feeling very chastened and humbled, having the realization. And he went to his neighbor, getting down on his knees and asking, could he please become his student, asking his forgiveness for the pride that he had shown. What is the message of this story for us? What's its deep meaning relative to this talisman? that which we've worn as being representative of and a connection to our divine self, our God self. What does this story tell us? How many of us have spoken with pride, wear as an emblem, show off that which gives evidence of our having been with some guru or other for so many years, followed some teaching for some time. Wearing it as a badge of honor in some way, to give us credibility, to give us some standing. What does this story of Geeho and Geerko mean for us? Thank you.